Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you very much for being here tonight. My name is Gavin. If you're into true crime and you like to cut past the sensationalism, the fluff, you've found the right place, and I'm glad you have. Tonight, I'm actually really excited to introduce to you guys a new friend, somebody who reached out to me because of my coverage of the case of Madeline Soto. Her name is Beth Meeks. Beth is somebody with deep knowledge in criminal justice, forensic psychology. She's an expert on gender-based violence. So I'm going to bring her on. We're going to talk a little bit about the Madeline Soto case. Beth, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. So this is Beth's first time on YouTube, guys. It's hard to get in front of a camera with hundreds or sometimes even thousands of people watching. So we're just going to, hopefully it'll just feel like a conversation, Beth. And then along the way, as questions come in, guys, you guys know the rule. If you put GF in your comment, that will help me see it. But as we go along, there might be some questions that we bring up. The other thing, I should have told you this before we went on, Beth. I will sometimes interrupt you. It might drive you crazy. It does drive some people crazy, but I just can't help myself sometimes. If you say something, ooh. So I just apologize in advance for that.
I appreciate it because I do that myself, and I don't want to be the only one. So.
Oh, good. We're two peas in a pod. Okay, when you reached out to me, you sent me a message through my website. Everybody knows if you go to my website, I've actually changed it up a little bit, guys. If you go to my website, now there's like a little envelope right here. That's how you can contact me. But you reached out to me through the website and you told me about your background and a couple of opinions that you had about Stephen Stearns and Jen Soto. So why don't we start with, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what makes you uniquely qualified to talk about maybe the psychology of what's going on in the Madeline Soto case?
Yeah. So I have spent the last 30 years, a little more, working in the field of gender-based violence, domestic violence shelters, offenders groups in jails and prisons, have had extensive training on all of those topics, have worked around the country, including working in a position hand in hand with the federal government where basically I was a troubleshooter for all 56 states and territories on everything domestic violence. And in my free time, I work as a consultant, as a trial consultant and expert witness, and usually in domestic violence cases of some sort, often in homicide cases. I've testified in another number of homicide cases and worked with a number of lawyers who were actually defending people who had killed in self-defense.
Tell us the difference between a regular witness in a trial and an expert witness.
Well, an expert witness has to get on the stand and undergo this battery of intense questioning to be qualified as an expert. The judge makes a ruling to decide if you're qualified as an expert.
Right.
If you're qualified as an expert, there are a couple of different rules for an expert. So, for instance, other witnesses have to sit outside of the room and can only come into the courtroom when they're testifying. The expert can sit through all of the testimony. The expert can also refer to other people's testimony, interviews they've done. So it's sort of a hearsay exception, right? They can talk about things they've learned from other places.
Yeah. So you're able to, based on your expertise, specifically render opinions, give basically not diagnoses, but you're able to give expert opinions outside of the other witnesses that will just say, I saw this happen. And that's all they can really testify to, right?
Yes, they fact witnesses. Yeah, will usually have a series of questions just about things they've seen or done or heard directly. Yeah, I'm not a clinician, so I don't see people for counseling, prescribe meds and that sort of stuff. I'm more like a behaviorist. And when I qualify, I'm very often qualified as an expert in victim and offender behavior.
Okay. So I'm just going to pull up the website here real quick. So Beth has her bachelor's degree from the University of Findlay in social work. She has a Master of Science in Criminal Justice, Forensic Psychology from Tiffin University. She has all sorts of awesome awards and everything. And then the professional background is even on your website. And I know that this is, let's see, there was a C, no, it was on the accomplishments, right? So anyway, this is a short version of your CV. You've actually got a very, very long curriculum vitae. So why don't we go to, let's bring Maddie up. I like to have our victims' pictures up. What was, when you reached out to me, tell everybody basically the thesis that you were working on that you explained to me.
Yeah, so I think it kind of boils down to, I'll say two main things. The first is, I know that there's a lot of anger with Jen Soto.
Mm-hmm.
That is the case in these sort of situations, and it is warranted. She's not been a perfect person, but what I said to you earlier was this. This offender really wants to share the blame with somebody, and I don't want to help him. And part of what happens is that we really underestimate how calculating offenders are. I think initially what I said to you was the thing I don't hear anyone talking about is that Jen has this bipolar diagnosis. And
Mm-hmm.
I've heard people talk about that, but there's a lot of reading Jen as guilty based on her emotionless expressions or way of communicating. And in the one interview with the detectives, she talked about the medication that she's on. That medication stabilizes your mood by leveling everything out. It can have a sedating effect, and it has, by its very nature, the effect of suppressing emotions. A lot of people who have bipolar disorder actually fail on their medications because they stop taking them because they will tell you they can't feel anything. And so I think that's part of what's happening, and I haven't heard anyone say that yet. Again, that does not excuse anything she did that contributed to the situation.
But it
It
is something like I have watched those videos and listened to those conversations and gone, what is the matter with this person? She's not concerned about her own daughter. She's really just kind of coming to the defense of Stefan Stearns, and she's not. I mean, there was one time where she called the murder part evil, but the other part, the 5-year abuse of Madeline, she just called that. She actually just kind of glossed over it. Yeah, there's that, but the murder is what's really evil, right? So I think what you just described, I have been guilty. I've been wondering what the devil, man. Why does she act that way? And one of the things that you mentioned to me in your message to me, your email, was that people like Mr. Stearns, they look for guardians that have this kind of mental disorder, right?
Absolutely right. So the other thing I think that is probably happening with her is, I would guess that she has maybe some limitations in her cognitive abilities. Like, if we knew her schooling history, that she was probably in supportive classes. Her vocabulary is pretty simplified. She seems to take longer than normal to process concepts that people are giving to her. And some of the things, like the language about, well, I didn't think he had done something evil.
Yeah.
I I don't think she has kind of good reaction timing. She does not have the normal timing that we kind of expect in, most people. So I think she's got a couple of things happening at the same time. And yes, part of what I said to you was, you know, these offenders, if you spend time with them, and post conviction, if they'll talk a little bit about um, uh, what they're doing, what they will tell you is that they test their targets, right? So they'll go to a playground and start talking to kids. And if they can get away with talking to a kid for a few sentences and no one intervenes, then they'll continue to press that target.
Oh,
If, if however, they go to a playground or wherever they are and they start to talk to a kid, like sometimes you'll hear, oh, well, their parents stepped over right away because they, and asked me who I was. So I knew I had to leave that one alone. Or they'll say a sibling came over and intervened and said, to the target, we don't talk to strangers. Let's go find mom. And the offenders will tell you, I had to move away from that kid because I knew the sibling would be a problem for me.
hmm.
So offenders are very calculated about, they're not just looking for a child that they want to target, they're vetting the gateway. And I think I said to you, we talk a lot about grooming children, and we don't talk so much about grooming the gateway. And
So,
I think,
real quick, getting to what, like the example you just said. So, on the playground, they approach a child that they have abusive intent. They have interest in this child, right?
Mhm.
If nobody comes up right away, I mean, that doesn't just mean that there's not a parent there. There could possibly be a parent there, but they're just not, that they're not recognizing the danger. Is that what you're saying?
yes, yes. What that is saying is that it's at least giving the initial signal to the offender that these parents are not attuned to problems, or that they're overly trusting, or that they're just generally not aware of what's happening around their child. And all of that presents an opportunity to the offender to get to the child.
Okay, so in Maddie's case, if I remember correctly, Mr. Stearns met Jen at work. So I would imagine that Jennifer would probably have a picture of her daughter or like a little family group on her desk. She'd probably talk. I mean, in corporate environments that I have worked in, everybody knows about all of my kids and my wife and all the stuff that we're doing because that's the most important thing to me, right? And if even if Jen is like what we wouldn't consider the world's greatest parent, she still did appear to love her daughter, right? So this could be something where Stefan sees, oh, I see a picture. There is a daughter there. And with my interactions at work with Jennifer, I see that she is an open gateway. Is that?
Mhm. Yes, I think that that's quite possible. That's a great example of a place where someone would be sizing a person up. And the thing about it is, I think it appears to me that this potential combination of characteristics, maybe some cognitive issues and some mental health issues, um, she does not appear to me to be a person who can actually survive wholly independently, right? Your dad owns the condo she lives in. She seems to have kind of a string of lower paying jobs. It's not like she has a job where she stayed somewhere and, earns a good living, and she has roommates with her. All of that to say this, I think that she's pretty dependent on another adult to kind of be her leader. She seems like she needs someone else to kind of, uh, you know, just to sort of guide her through life. I think it's possible that her dad was doing that because he's the person that made sure she was housed. And I think it's possible, dad apparently bought a van and went on the road or something. And I think it's
Yeah.
possible that when her dad left, Stefan filled that spot. And a lot of people who have those kind of limitations are very drawn to people who are nice to them. Maybe they've experienced bullying in the past.
Mm,
They're drawn to people who seem more confident than they are.
yeah.
So if you are a predator and you are realizing that these limitations are there and you can slide in and become her leader, that is really a benefit to you. Now, that additionally, the thing that would be a benefit here to Mr. Stearns is that the limitations Jen has are not overt, right? They don't stop her from working. She doesn't appear to have like an ongoing case manager. She doesn't have intervention of the system. There aren't a bunch of people in her house and in her business all
Uh,
the time. So the advantage to him was that he found someone who was perhaps naive, perhaps dependent, but not so dependent that it triggers the intervention of any outside parties.
Now, what about this comment that Jackie is saying? Jackie is saying, don't forget she was a teacher, so her intellect can't be too bad. What do you think about? I don't know that she was a full-time teacher. I think she was a substitute teacher.
I mean, yeah. So for my first thought was, schools are very, very desperate for substitute teachers, and I don't know how long she did that. And if she wasn't assigned to a classroom permanently, she didn't have to do any actual subject matter teaching. Uh, and I don't know what grades she was in, right?
Yeah,
If they were putting her in senior calc, that's one thing. But if she was, subbing in a preschool or a kindergarten class, that's different, right? Because her abilities with different age ranges would be better. Like her intellectual match would be better with younger children than older children. So I did hear that she was a substitute teacher. Yeah, I didn't explore all the parameters of that, but being an occasional substitute teacher is far different than being, in a classroom regularly, actually having to teach a subject, I think.
gotcha. Okay, so getting back to that part where you're talking about, there's no intervention by any governmental agency. Child Protective Services aren't in and out of there. Uh, I mean, is that something that the offenders that you've worked with over your 3-decade career? I mean, is that something that they're specifically attuned to?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. If you have a child protective case manager who's showing up at the house unannounced, once a month, a child predator doesn't really want to be around for that. They will sometimes, depending on how far they are from home and if they have a prior criminal record, you know, a lot of things go into their calculations. But in this particular situation, as a predator, he really found, he was probably very excited about this great opportunity.
Oh, that's actually that's really sad. Yeah. Lori, well, it's gross is what it is. It's beyond sad. It's disgusting. It's revolting that, you know,
Yeah.
a predator like that would think in those terms, right? I've got,
One of the things that's really difficult for people to wrap their mind around, and um, I hear less analysis of his behavior maybe than Jen's, and I think it's because most people are not sex offenders, and their parents, and they can relate to what Jen should have done, what the expectation should have been, right?
yeah,
But it's harder to know what's really going on in the head of a sex offender, and that's because it's the way that they view this is disturbing. It's terrible. And it's not something most people ever have to see or think about or hear from them. I think that I think I told you earlier, he wants to share this blame and I don't want to help him. I think this dorky, well, I don't really know what's going on and I don't have a job. And, I don't know, I was buying Dungeons and Dragons cards or whatever the heck he said he
yeah,
was doing.
Pokemon and Tamagotchi and the whole thing. Yeah.
That is all a put on. This man is so calculating. I think the last thing I saw for sure was that they had found at this point 35,000 CSAM images. I
Yeah.
heard somewhere that it was up over 100,000. I mean, this is a distribution warehouse full of child pornography. I don't have 70,000 pictures of my whole darn family. Most of us probably don't. You're not keeping that level of material for your own use. I would be very surprised if he was not selling that material. He didn't seem to be gainfully employed, but occasionally had money. I would suspect that that's where that's coming from.
Well, what I'm wondering, and maybe you have some insight into this, and I don't want this video to be an instruction manual for would-be predators, right? Number one, you're saying that all the childish behavior isn't a failure to launch, but more of a camouflage. Am I
Correct.
understanding that?
100%. Yes.
So that's something that I've misunderstood the whole time. One of these, like well, since we've started with this case, I think that was back in March that I picked up this case. I've been kind of wondering, well, is Mr. Stearns he's a 37-year-old, 12-year-old? I've kind of wondered that. But I mean, you're telling me that's not the case. This is somebody who just puts on the camouflage.
Right. Because I would dare say so far, probably the general public's belief system about him is, he might be on drugs. He's just kind of hapless. This woman, sort of didn't have any guardrails, so he was just able to do it. It might be that he's got a fixation with this one kid. I don't think any of that is true. I
Hmm.
think that he targeted this family because he knew that the gateway was weak. I think that there are a lot of things that he says or does where he reshapes Jen's reality, which I think is not probably very hard to do, right? So if he has money and she says, "Oh, where'd you get money?" I'm certain he's lying to her constantly that he won at gambling or got it from his parents. Um, I think the
Mm.
other thing that's really difficult for people to understand is this. The way I would phrase it is this. He doesn't have the kind of expected full-time job that, sort of the normal public has, but he
Yeah.
has a full-time job. His sexual offending is his full-time job. It's his full-time focus. People would be distraught if they could hear in his head how most of his day is arranged around some behavior related to his offending.
Okay, so this is like a Dexter where he is just drawn to this offense, and everything that he does is in support of getting that fix, I guess, right? Doing. Hey, Shu Tomsano says Meeks, I think he means Beth Meeks. Do groomers use gaslighting and blame shifting? I think that's what you're talking about a little bit, right?
100%. A
So
100%. They're
describe
very
that for us a little bit.
So, for instance, he probably at some point he may have laid hints about, well, I know it's hard for Maddie to sleep in here with you, so she should probably go sleep somewhere else. Oh, that her bedroom's not really a great place to sleep. She should probably just go up to the guest room. Oh, well, I know I'm going to be in there too. Like so this culminates in him kind of leading her towards this conclusion that it's fine for Maddie to go sleep in a room with him. And later, and again, yes, a normal functioning parent would know and should know to say no to that. Um, in my opinion, she's very dependent. She's very manipulable. I think he would talk people into something and sort of lead them to believe it was their idea.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes me beg another question. Then we'll get to Patty's question. But like, she had two roommates in the house, one of which had known her forever, had known Madeline since she was born. She's described as Jennifer's sister's best friend, right? They were childhood friends. They've known each other forever. And she said stuff like, no, Jennifer was a great mom. Jennifer loved Madeline. She was a great mom. So, I mean, how does that square?
Well, I think most people, um, a lot of people inaccurately rate competence as kindness. I Here's a strange story. I went out to dinner one night with a few friends, and we
Okay.
lived in a small town, so we all had the same doctor. And everybody at the table was like, "Oh, isn't he wonderful? He's a wonderful doctor. He's so nice. It's great." My kid had poison ivy and he misdiagnosed it as something else. Oh, then, but he's a great doctor. So then the next person says, he misdiagnosed my blah, 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 something or other. So over the next few minutes, four people at the table said he had misdiagnosed something, but they kept saying what a great doctor he was. And I said, hey, y'all, I don't think the empirical evidence supports the conclusion. I said, four of us have been misdiagnosed by this man. I think he's a nice man. That does not mean he's a good doctor. I think a lot of people would see that Jen was affectionate to Maddie, that she was proud of her. I don't know that that equates to being a good barrier system around your child who's got good boundaries and can identify as sex offenders. I think she was a good parent in a number of ways. I think that's true.
Um, well, I've got so many more questions along this line. It's a lot easier to convince somebody of something than to convince somebody that they're wrong about something, right? So once somebody gets in their head that, oh, Jen's a great mom, maybe it would take a lot in order to change your opinion about that, right? Okay, Patty says, Gavin, I've worked in mental health for several years and said previously that Jen's meds likely made her have a flat effect. This expert is very enlightening. So it wasn't a question, it was a compliment. That's why I brought that up. So let's see. Before I asked you the question about the roommate, what were we talking about? I had so many questions about that. I guess I lost my train of thought. That I don't know.
We'll find it in a minute.
I just no. It came to me. All right. I am curious about your opinion, since we're talking about you're an expert witness here. I'm curious about your opinion on the idea that Jen may have been involved and maybe even envious or jealous of the relationship between Madeline and Stefan. And the theory goes, and I have to say I probably bought into this pretty early on. I almost felt like Jen, how could she not know what was going on? And could she have been, and I know everybody hates this word, but it's the perfect description of what I'm feeling here. Could she have been pimping her daughter to Stefan for the purpose of making him happy in order to make herself happy, I guess? Is that, I don't know if I'm even making that sound okay.
Yeah, no, like that she was sort of just overlooking it and letting him have access to her child so that she could keep him around, I think is probably the sentiment that's
Okay,
in that.
yeah.
Like, I think there are a lot of people who are like, don't want to face the sexual abuse because they don't want to lose their husband or whatever it is. So I'll say this. I don't think Jen was involved, at least not in any sort of knowing way, right? Because I don't think she could lie convincingly to these detectives. There's a whole nother thing to talk about there. Honestly, I think this department has done a great job of handling their interviews.
Oh,
The
yeah.
detectives, as well as just the patrol officers and the officers doing follow-up. I mean, I'm really impressed at sort of the consistency in their interviewing techniques, right?
Well, and if you actually just compound that by the fact that there are 3 agencies working on this case and they're all working so well together and pulling on the same end of the rope, right? They're all, I have been really impressed, and I've seen a lot of documents and I've seen a lot of reports over the years. I've sat through a lot of trials. They're doing a great job.
Yeah, they're doing a good job. And there were some reports that Jen was in a facility. I don't know what that means. I took it to mean getting inpatient mental health treatment, which did not surprise me at all. And I thought seemed very consistent with her mental health condition and with kind of my observations about her potential limitations.
So what would that mean for her? What if she's checking into a facility, which we've all heard those rumors as well? Well, it was in documents. It was in an audio recording, as I remember. Her
Yes.
lawyer at his his advice was to check in. So what kind of treatment would she be seeking in that kind
Well,
of?
I think it's possible that the sort of the pressure that she was under was just compounding existing conditions she had. I think at some point she talked about maybe also having depression, and that would be very common that you would have other co-occurring disorders with bipolar. And I think, medication has its limits. So she probably needed a place where maybe she could be more heavily sedated for a while. She may have needed a place where she could have sort of intensive talk therapy with someone who can help her process some of what's happening. If she doesn't process information well, all of this information is coming at her and it's probably overwhelming. I would think that her depression is exacerbated. So she probably did need at least temporary inpatient help to adjust meds, maybe add meds, probably process and kind of decompress. I don't, is she out of
We
a
don't know.
facility?
We don't know.
I mean, I hope that it doesn't cause a break from reality, although I acknowledge that that's possible. Yeah, I'm certain she's not in probably a good mental space. At any rate, I don't think she could keep it from the cops. I don't think she could lie consistently. Here's the other thing that I find really interesting. We all want to know why she didn't do something or why she didn't know that he was offending her.
Yeah.
But I just listened to an interview where Stefan's mother says Maddie told her she and Stefan were sleeping in a bed together.
Yeah.
And she thought it was strange. And Maddie said something like, "Isn't that great?" And she said, "No, it is not great." I can't remember if she said she mentioned it to Jen or what the situation is. But also, none of these roommates knew that she was sleeping in a room with him.
Yeah. Again, that is one of those things where I'm like, how do people not notice?
So the common denominator is what? It's him.
Well, it's him. Yeah, it's Stefan.
And his manipulations and the work he does to cover things up, that's intentional. So it's not just that Jen had limitations. It's that those limitations were being exploited.
Well, you were talking about earlier and describing it very well, I thought, about, the predator testing the gatekeeper to make sure that the gatekeeper's, the gate is open. And I know I'm not describing that really well, but in this case where she has two other roommates, he would have to do the same with them, right?
Well, and somehow he had gained everyone's trust. I mean, he was apparently filming one of the roommates without their knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. Like this
is such a calculated offender. This hapless, this costume he puts on with his, beat up car and stocking cap, that is such a ruse. None of that is real. I would probably bet my career on the fact that most of this man's days are spent focusing on his offenses. Either how to find a person to offend, thinking of how to offend, reminiscing about past offenses, figuring out how to clean up problems, like maybe someone is catching on and he needs to derail them. People would be disturbed to find that people who are offending at this level, especially the types of offenses that he was committing, have obviously increased in severity over time. He has a full-time job.
Well, that is my question. I mean, the likelihood, it sounds like to me, the likelihood that Madeline is his first and only victim, having been victimized for 5 years, is pretty low. Am I?
Probably pretty low. But I don't know that I would suspect if he has other victims that maybe it didn't progress to some of these things because he didn't have the same kind of access and time that he had in this situation.
There was a case that I've mentioned here on the channel before, but there was a case local to me where a grown young woman, I think she was 20 or 21, out of nowhere walked into the state police and said, "My stepdad started abusing me when I was X years old. And it happened until I moved out." And I just, for some reason, in that moment, she had been able to work through, I mean, all of the weight of everything that had been piled on her from the time she was a little girl, and she was able to walk into the state police for whatever the triggering event was. She did it. And when I read that police report, man, I was like, I had my dad tears running, man. Good for that woman, right? So I had wondered if Stefan had other victims that, like you said, it didn't progress as far maybe as it did with Maddie, and they hadn't quite figured it out yet. They might be getting into early adulthood or something like that, and they might be dealing with the baggage and the ramifications. And saying things like baggage and ramifications really understates what what is really happening to these victims. But given enough time, would it have been possible for one or two or five or 10 young women to come out and say, he did this to me? I
It
wondered.
it it could be. I think that, you know, depending on where he's lived, how old the person, the child was that he was offending, how far the offense went. I mean, it could be something that they blew off or just kind of deleted from, your mind will override things sometimes just so you can survive. So they might not even realize that what happened was a sex offense. So I know that sounds crazy coming out of my mouth, but you know, I mean, he started with Maddie when she was like 7, 8, right? Maybe
Eight,
before that.
eight that we know of. It could
Mhm.
have happened long before that.
So when these people are targeting very young children, you know, now I'm a woman of a certain age. We didn't talk about that kind of stuff. I mean, I know
Yeah,
now people talk about it in their classes, and we have these prevention programs even in schools that tell kids, if anybody ever, if they want to touch you and you don't participate, or don't let anybody touch you where your bathing suit is. We didn't talk about that kind of stuff many years ago, and in some places they still
right.
don't talk about it. And so sometimes kids don't know that what's happening is wrong. And the offender is certainly telling them it's not. And very often, if a child says, "Oh, why did you do that? I don't like that." Somebody mentioned gaslighting earlier. Here it comes.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? I didn't do that. So, I mean, that's one of the many reasons that a very small percentage of a sex offender's victims come forward. I do think that I read or saw somewhere that there were other children besides Maddie in some of these CCM images that he had.
Well, yeah, I think the 1,700 images, those were all Maddie. There were images and videos. I think those were all
Mhm.
Maddie, but out of the 35,000 others, I think those were thousands of other victims. So to me, it seems like they probably were trading currency for people like him. I think he was probably
Yeah,
turning that around.
yeah.
Do you have any idea how that works? Like, like again, I don't want this to be a teaching predators how to be a predator, but like, talk about a dangerous game to find people like you, right?
Yeah. I mean, so for starters, there's a whole online world where sex offenders hang out together. And there are literal, chat spaces that you have to be a member to go into, and they vet each other. And they will, in those
Wow.
chat spaces, teach each other how to commit offenses. They will sometimes, in those chat spaces, when one of them gets arrested, they will all chip in, here's some money
Oh,
for a defense attorney. They will have debates in those spaces about uh, ages of children that it's okay or preferable to offend with, right? They have these very strange
wow.
moral boundaries. So one of the problems with a sex offender is that someone can come and stand next to you and say, you could say, "Isn't it terrible what happened to Maddie Soto?" And they could say, "Yeah, it's horrifying." And that person could be a sex offender. They may be a sex offender who believes that you should only offend very small children because they won't remember what happened to
Only
them.
small children. Oh,
So when they agree with you that it's terrible what happened to Maddie, they're not necessarily agreeing that sex offenses are wrong. They may be agreeing that sex offenses with an older child are wrong. And this is how sex offenders live amongst us and we don't know it. Um, yeah, so that's
Whoa.
the first thing, is that they have these chat rooms where they hang out. And it's interesting. I was thinking about, the old days. How did they find each other? Well, again, sex offenders tend to be observers of behavior, right? Because they need to
Yeah.
know who they can access. And they're very observant of children that they want to groom, because they need to be able to lure the children into activities or trusting them, right? So they're watching constantly to learn what the child is comfortable with or afraid of. What kind of things do they like? What's their favorite food? Where do they want to go on vacation? Just anything. Um, and
Oh,
I
and
back
they
in
will
the
keep an
day,
inventory of everything that they know about. Oh, that's dark.
many sex offenders will look across a room and see another person doing what they're doing. So they know that that person is probably also a sex offender, and they have some coded language that they'll use to talk to each other.
Wow. Okay, here's a good question from Words Bloom. Gavin, if Jen didn't know, why would she be worried about it turning into a Woody Allen situation? Why would she even think that if she had no clue? Have you heard about this text that she sent?
Mm-mm.
She sent a text that uh, basically said that she didn't want the situation with Maddie and Stefan to turn into a Woody Allen situation. That's what she called it. And so a lot of people have taken that to mean, well, of course she knew what was going on there. Uh, so maybe we do this exercise. I think our presupposition so far has been that Jennifer was cognitively disabled. She was overly medicated. She really didn't know what was going on. But if we could change that presupposition to Jennifer did know what was going on, what would that look like in that household?
So this is the first time I'm hearing about the text, but I'll say this. If the text said, I don't want this to turn into a Woody Allen situation, and she knew what was happening, what, now, again, context is very important. You will hear me talk
Sure.
about this all the time. I'm making an assumption here that she means, I don't want my daughter to basically steal my romantic partner, or I don't want my romantic partner to give up his relationship with me to have a relationship with my daughter.
Yeah.
So she doesn't want that to happen, which indicates that she wants to keep Stefan Stearns. Then wouldn't she intervene to do that? I think not intervening to keep him indicates that she didn't fully understand what was happening. Now, also, I don't have all the information that other people have, right? I know there was a lot of discussion about these officers and why haven't they charged her yet, and this little kind of
Yeah, I've talked about that a lot.
this immunity for a day situation they gave her. And this is one of the things that I say makes me really impressed with the way law enforcement is handling this. So I think a couple of things are happening here. My guess would be that law enforcement knows better than we know all of Jen's limitations. I think they know about her mental health issues, and they know if she has cognitive limitations. All of those kind of things, if there are subtle things Jen did, her limitations would make it difficult to go to court and assign her culpability for something very vague, right?
Hmm.
So unless she had done something overt,
Specific.
that right. Now, I also think, especially with these however many tens of thousands of images this guy has, they might need her help. So they might be being friendly with her for a while and then intending to charge her with something later. They might need her help identifying who people are in these images that he had. They might need her help tracking places that he went to so that they can look into people he spent time with and determine if they were part of his clientele that he was buying and selling from. Um, she may accidentally give up information that she doesn't even realize is valuable to them. So they may be kind of slow walking whatever they're going to do with her to deal with more pressing problems, right? Like, who
Yeah.
are all of the
And I,
victims?
I see that in prosecutions all the time where I even there's a prosecutor's office that I'm pretty friendly with the prosecutors in. that's out of state, but I'm friendly with them. I've done enough work with them that they trust me, where they will give me heads up. Hey, tomorrow there's going to be a press release. This is what it's going to say. That will happen sometimes. And with those guys, on more than one occasion, I've heard and in a couple of weeks we'll have something else. And it's something like, a conspirator or something like that.
Mhm.
So prosecutors love to prosecute and investigators love to investigate. And my question, I guess the thing that I'm questioning though is like, um, let's say Jennifer knew what was happening. Is it possible for a person like Jennifer to know what's happening and still not really understand the grave or evil or whatever adjective you want to add to it, nature of what's going on?
I think that actually that happens in a lot of households where typically a male partner is assaulting a child and the mother maybe feels like something is off or she knows something has happened that makes her uncomfortable, but she cannot imagine the full extent of what's happening, right? I mean, like, how many things have I said in this last hour that people are probably hearing for the first time in their lives that they could never have imagined would
Oh,
these
well,
people.
yeah, I've had those gestalts like 3 times so far since we've been talking. Yeah. Like, oh,
And your brain will work to protect you whether you want it to or not. And so, and I just, it's just not a world people live in. So they can't imagine what these offenders are up to. And so I think it's possible there were things that made her uncomfortable. I think there are probably even things she intervened in on occasion, right? Like, I can't imagine what, but I think that there are things she may have engaged, intervened in that she was a little bit uncomfortable with. But I think she in particular probably could not possibly know the extent of what he was doing.
oh man. MM Clark, the comment is, Gavin, I think it was his night. Remember, his parents said he slept all day. I believe that nighttime was his time to stalk and offend. And I think there is some truth to that. I mean, I have been a software developer and a data analyst and oh my goodness, a web developer for years and years and years. And whenever I get into a groove on a project, a big project over the last 25, 30 years, I have turned to the nighttime to do that because the world is off.
There you
Everybody
go.
leaves me alone, right? So, I mean, for offenders like this, I bet they can
Yes.
get away with a lot of stuff because everybody else is literally asleep.
Yes. Very common for sex offenders to be working in the night in their home. Yes.
And it's scary the way that you describe that that he has a full-time job, right? That's what he's doing. Okay, Lori asks, why did Jennifer Soto lie incessantly to law enforcement if she was a wonderful but gullible mom? So, Lori, for me, like, we're not getting very specific here. We really don't know what she lied about. I think that she told a couple of different lies, but I don't know that she did. But let's assume that she did lie for a second here, Beth. Why would she do that if she was just a gullible, maybe, albeit mentally incapable? I don't know.
I don't know that she would. I mean, trust me, the door is open that my entire hypothesis here is wrong. That's possible. Um, I'll, I will vouch for myself and say this. I've never had that happen yet. I might be wrong in a piece here and there. But
Good.
what I think things that the couple of things that I see that concern me that I think people take as lying or downplaying something, like the fact that she told him to call a lawyer right away, or she called
Yeah,
his dad. You're gonna have to get. You know what I think that was about?
that was weird.
I don't. I don't know that that was about his survival. I think it was about hers.
Okay, how so?
I think her immediate reaction was, "Oh, if something happens to him, how am I going to make it?"
Because he is the leader that she must follow.
Because she's so dependent on him. I also think when she said, well, I didn't think he would do anything evil. Honestly, I think that was just her limitation. I think she missed a word or didn't have the right words there. I felt like she was just processing slower in that moment, right? When they were pushing her for answers. And I think I've known a lot of women who found out that someone was offending against their child. And generally they will say, I could not, I would never have imagined he was doing this. People will come out of the woodwork. He's the nicest guy. He would never do this.
Well, and it is true that I would say most of us we cannot imagine. It is not in us to imagine the things that he was doing.
And I think the other thing is, so she's she's experiencing a trauma. We're watching it unfold live, right? Well, on video now, but
yeah,
she has, how, if you've ever experienced the situation where someone has to tell you that a loved one has passed, and at first you're like, what? No, I just talked to them. It couldn't be them. They're fine.
You're immediately defensive. Yeah.
So she's having that reaction. Oh no, it couldn't be him. Right.
But it looks a little stranger because it's slower, you think?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's unfolding over multiple days. And she's essentially experiencing grief multiple times over, right? Your child is missing. There's grief. Oh, wait, now you're telling me my kid is dead. Oh, wait, now you're telling me my boyfriend did all this. So she's kind of being hit with all of this information that is impossible to comprehend. And it just keeps coming. So I don't think she gets time to process the reality of one thing. Like, there was a moment at which she hesitated and said something to the police like, no, I believed you, but they were like, you didn't believe us? Why did you think this? I think she did not process and fully absorb what they were saying. It's one thing to hear it. It's another thing to really take it in.
Well, and there was a moment where the detective, who, again, just brilliant work, but he was talking about, we showed you this picture and like, Jen, that is rape. Like, right. He had to tell her, she didn't understand.
And I think there were several pictures they showed her that it should have been obvious that it was Maddie. And she was like, nope, I don't know who that is.
Yeah.
That was just absolute denial.
Okay. So Shelley's Flowers says, will you ask your specialist? This is Beth. How was he able to keep his parents in the dark for so long?
It sounds to me like he sort of used them as a transient landing pad almost. He didn't have shared computers with them. He apparently had some of this stuff in storage. They seem like decent people who didn't go into his room and dig around recreationally. I think at the point where you're almost 40 and you're using them as a flop house, and sometimes you're here and sometimes you're there, all of that actually increases his ability to hide things, because no one ever gets to see him in the hole for an extended period of time, right?
Yeah.
So his parents don't necessarily know where he is. When he's not with Jen, she may not exactly know where he is, or may think he's with, versus if someone lives with you every day for years uninterrupted, even an offender will develop patterns, right? And then be able to say something is wrong. Why does he always go to this guy's house for 2 hours on this day? And then he always has money the next day, right? That's how we pick up suspicious patterns. But part of this weird transient thing he had going on where he didn't have a schedule, he slept all day, which again is when people are awake. They would notice patterns if you had them. If you're up at night, they don't know what you're doing. It's hard to pick up the patterns. So I just think all of that stuff contributes to none of these people being able to say, wait a minute, there are enough things here to make me think this guy is really a danger. He's got a problem.
And his parents don't seem to me like they have the same kind of mental slowness as Jennifer might. They seem average IQ kind of folks, right?
Yep.
Here's a very good question. Let me bring this one up. This is from Nettie saying, Beth, what is the best defense against predators like Stefan Stearns? And actually, let me add to that a little bit. Like my wife and I consider ourselves average to above average intelligence, right? And if it's above, it's like we're about average. We would recognize in our children if they were below average, I think, and we are rational enough people to admit that aloud, at least to one another. Um, I mean, do would people like us bear responsibility for defending the, I guess the I'm trying to figure out what the right word is, but the potential victims, right? Is it on us to protect those that we love and know that are a little bit more Jen Soto-ish? Is it our role to protect them?
That is a good question.
That's tough.
Like, yeah.
Like
I
it's really
don't,
tough.
yeah. I don't, so I guess what I'll say is this. I don't think, even though I think she has limitations, I don't think that means, um, she's completely off the hook. You can have limitations and still do things that are wrong. I trust that law enforcement will know that and find that, and they'll be able to identify which things are attached to the limitations and which are not if they exist, and that they'll be able to charge accordingly. What is the best defense against predators? Okay, well, I'll say to you three things. One is you very rarely let your children out of your sight, right? And only to people you feel clear about. Trust your gut instincts. If something is making you uncomfortable, if you don't feel good about when your kid is with this person, you don't have to send your kid with that person. I mean, one of the things that happens, especially for women, is that we are socialized to be polite and kind. And
Right.
I remember as a kid saying things to my mom like, I don't like that guy. And she's like, he has never done anything to you. So you be nice and you go, whatever the
Mm.
thing was, right? So the first thing is keep your kids close, but the second thing is we can start young in ways that don't scare our children, telling them some things, right? Like it is okay to be rude or lie if you need to be safe, right? That is something we don't take. Even now, I'm still often trying to tell adult women, if this person makes you uncomfortable, you can lie to get rid of them. That is an okay thing to do.
That's a
Um,
strategy to be
mhm.
safe.
You also have to teach people from early on that they own their body. This means we don't say things like, give grandpa a hug. I don't want to give grandpa a hug. Go on, we have to give grandpa a hug. No, we don't. You own your body. If you don't want to use it to do this thing right now, you don't have to, right? And so there's two things that you can do to teach your child to help defend themselves. But the third thing that I will say is this. Uh, Many violent offenders, including sex offenders, are tip of the iceberg offenders. So if you see two things that are making you
What does
uncomfortable,
that mean? What's tip of the iceberg?
so an iceberg, the majority of an iceberg, 90% of it is actually below the water and you never see it. So what you see
Okay.
on top of the water is only 10% of the iceberg.
Okay, I'm following you. So if you see most offenders, the stuff that you know about is just a little bit.
If you're seeing something that makes you uncomfortable, multiply that by 5 or 10. And that's what they're actually doing.
Okay, wow. Hey, I mean that's disturbing, but
Mhm.
probably very good advice. Give me an example of a lie that's okay to tell for your own safety.
It is okay if someone is following you down the street. It's okay to go to a house that's not yours or walk towards a house that's yours or tell them, this is my house right here. And go into, if someone's approaching you and saying, I'll give you a ride. It's okay to say, I already have a ride. My mom's coming to get me, even if you don't. It's okay to just scream and run away.
Hmm.
Um, One of the things that most adult women know, if you're out and about and there is a man paying attention to you that's unwanted, a lot of women will say, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm married. even if they're not. All of those are the kinds of are protective lies that are good to train children to use.
All right, those are good examples. Here's another one. Thank you, Beth Meeks, for coming on. I appreciate your insight and intelligence. You are doing a great job showing how complicated and layered people are. All the shades of gray. Sending love from Iceland. Thank you very much, TCF. And a lot of people are saying Beth needs to come on more often. You're doing great. This is your first time doing a live like this. You're doing great. Tony asks, what does Beth think about a little girl abused? There would be signs she would have been in so much pain. So that sentence isn't really constructed really well, but I think we follow it, right?
Yeah. Actually, a lot of people assume that after a sexual assault, even on adults, but especially children, that there are actual signs, actual physical injuries that would be visible. And the reality is, most of the time, there is not. I mean, you can suffer some things that are very frightening and violent and not have visible injuries. But also, and again, there's a lot of disturbing stuff here, right? So we think a lot of this happened while she was asleep. We don't have any idea what kind of muscle relaxers he's giving her. We don't have any idea if he's introduced supplies to make the offenses easier to carry out. Some of the same kind of things that adults use with their partners. He could be introducing those. I think it is possible. And again, I don't know what the material looks like. To be honest, where you get visible injuries is when someone tends to be a sadistic sex offender and they're using objects, that sort of thing. I don't know if his offenses range that far up the scale.
I'm aware of a case in upstate New York where the offender did the same. He was on the sadistic level, right? He was doing extremely. He had ropes and pulleys and tackle and stuff like that he was abusing these women of. Now, I through what's called a FOIL request in the state of New York, Freedom of Information Law, got access to the entire case, and even with the abuse that those victims suffered, you could barely see it on photographs, like barely see it. And I had, Officer Brian Bennett on a couple of weeks ago where he was talking specifically about strangulation and just how hard it is, even with a forensic nurse, to be able to show that there's actual strangulation going on. So I think that is supportive of what you're saying, Beth, that it's not always evident. Two, it may not even be painful.
Well, and I know that sounds strange, but sometimes there are injuries that are associated with an offense and people miss the association, right? So often people who've experienced strangulation are hoarse, but it's the age of COVID. They're sick, right? And so we're missing line. I had a woman once who was strangled, but she didn't have any marks around her neck, but she had a mark on her side, and the offender had been straddling her as he was strangling her. And there was a mark on her side. And we have this nerve that runs down the side of our body that controls almost everything. And it is part of what's necessary for breathing. And if you pinch it off, you can pass out. And so to me, it was very evident that mark on her side was proof that she was telling the truth. But the law enforcement and medical staff that had seen her did not.
Well, that's one of those things that things are changing in investigations now on the boots on the ground. Like the average everyday, police officer, state trooper who's called to a domestic violence disturbance, they used to say, well, I don't see any red marks. I can't do anything. And that is changing, right, Beth?
It is.
Probably not fast enough.
Not fast enough. And we're kind of not all improving in the same ways at the same time. So there are some places in the country where it's might as well still be 1975, right? Because there will be a domestic and the police will come to your house, and then if they believe someone is an offender, they literally write them a summons. So it's the equivalent of a traffic ticket.
Right.
They don't arrest you, don't go to jail.
Yeah.
And then there are other places where you immediately go to jail. There are places where it's a non-bondable offense because judges know that a lot of stuff gets missed and they want to see the offender and be able to see the record before they let the offender out on bail, because so often when they're let out immediately, then sometimes they go back and commit an increased level of violence. So it's improving.
Not quickly enough, but we'll take the improvement, right? Let's see. Ruby Slippers. Let me bring this here. I have to figure out which buttons to push here, guys. Give me just a second. Gavin, ask why didn't Jen recognize Stefan Stearns or Maddie's body parts? He had a recognizable mark. And we actually, Beth, we have video of him that they did not redact out. They did not blur. When I showed it on my channel, I did blur it. But they were like stretching and pulling and taking pictures and lifting and the whole thing, right? He has very recognizable features on his genitalia, right? So Jen did not recognize it at first.
That was 100% a mental block out of shock. And so here are some other examples, right? So I knew someone that actually saw a dead body and then later said, well, there's a trash bag laying out there. Your brain does that to protect you. A lot of children...
wait a minute. Saw a dead body and converted that to it's not a dead body, it's a trash bag?
Right.
Okay.
So probably the best example of this is when children see a parent kill another parent, they will often tell you, my dad killed a dog, or my dad killed a chicken.
Oh, wow.
And you don't understand where that's coming from. And they have the memory, they know their dad did something, but their brain has automatically switched out the slide to protect them. And I think to some extent that was what was happening there. And I don't know that it was she did not really recognize it. I think it was more like, nope, I don't know what that is. I can't hear that.
Could be processing, could be something like that.
Her reaction, I think is way more common than we know.
Oh, wow. Okay, we're kind of running out of time here, but we've kept you on for an hour and 7 minutes, but just a couple more questions here. Why would Jennifer Soto lie to protect Stefan Stearns even if she thought he was innocent? It's easier to tell the truth. Again, I'm not sure that we know that Jennifer lied specifically. We don't know the specific. I feel like she did.
Yeah, I don't have a good example of a time where I think she lied specifically, but I'll also say this. You have to know it's a lie to be lying, right? So if what she's doing is telling them information that Stearns told her that she believes is real, if the lie originated with him, she may not even realize she's lying when she's passing on information.
That did feel, by the way, the stories that they told before it overtly turned into a homicide investigation, where their stories were kind of lining up on what happened in the day's events. It did feel very rehearsed, or at least it felt like he had told her all of these things that she should say.
So it's interesting, all of that stuff in the beginning where she was like, we got her dressed and we took her to school. I think that's actually a manifestation of that independence that dependence that she has on him.
I see.
I think she truly has difficulty seeing herself almost as a separate person. And I do agree with you. That read very much to me like him saying, well, remember, we took her to school and we saw her getting dressed. And I think that it's probably easier to influence her that way than you think.
Wow. Beth, thanks for joining me tonight. It's been awesome. And the live chat has been full of people saying Beth needs to come on more often. So I'm really glad you reached out. That was really awesome of you to just reach out. And guys, you should have seen the message. It was like several paragraphs in depth. And I sat there and I processed it for almost a full day before I was like, I've got to reach out. I need to know more. And we got to spend, I was really grateful for you for spending about an hour of your time just on the phone the other day chatting about this.
And I don't
It's
do this
enlightening.
all the time. I've literally never contacted a YouTuber and never commented on a YouTube video. But I actually, and I've said this to you several times, I was actually really impressed with your style. And I have said to you several times with the people that are viewing and interacting with you,
Yeah,
because
the
this
chat is amazing.
are not over sensationalized. People really are here to learn. People seem to approach things through a compassionate lens. Yeah, and I wouldn't want to be somewhere that was just kind of nonsense and drama.
Well, I appreciate you saying that and feeling that. I try really hard to be pretty chill about things. Like try to I really I'm not a classical true crime fan. Like I didn't grow up watching all the cops and the court TV and stuff like that. But when I got into this and realized, hey, there are puzzles here to solve, that kind of piqued my interest, right? And so maybe I'm just a little different, and I have to say my mods keep everything on track, and for the most part, everybody has the same kind of thing going on in the live chat too. So it's a fun little community we're building. Anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate it, guys. We will ask Beth Meeks on again, and I hope she will return. Couple things. Let me turn that off. Just a couple quick things before we wrap up. Tomorrow we're going to be looking at a poem that Stephen Stearns allegedly wrote while he was in lockup that seems to indicate that he is confessing to Madeline's murder, though I think that he would argue that it might not be. So we'll be doing that tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. Keep in mind that you can always head on over to my website. Let me bring it up here real quick for you guys to see. Give me just a second. I am just, here we go. So always go to my website where you can contact me the same way Beth did. If you have some kind of expertise like Beth does, please reach out. I would love to have conversations with you as well. And you can just do that through my website. Sign up for Crime Cod while you're at it. My often, I guess we'll call it, not too often, newsletter that I send out by email. You can subscribe if you want. Also, last plug, I've put it up on the screen throughout, but please join us on the Fish Tank on Facebook. If you are on Facebook and you want to chat with us, True Crime Aficionados, that is a great place to do it. With that, I will bid you adieu. Thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you on the next one if I have the right button here somewhere. Take care. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you liked what you saw, please consider subscribing. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below.